Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fourth session of our EstimatorXpress software skills course. Thanks for joining me again today. So our last session is all about the output side of things and how we can make use of the data that we've produced through our estimate in EstimatorXpress. So during this module, we'll look at how to make the most of the build program, how to use the data reports, and how to create your customer quotation and tailor it so it is presenting the level of detail that you want to show. And there's a number of different settings in there, so I'll give you a quick tour of those as well. So if you haven't already, please open up EstimatorXpress. And we're going to open up our training estimate, because all of the things that we're talking about today are things that you will do once you've completed your estimate. So if you can locate and open your training estimate. And the first thing we're going to do is to open the build program. Now the build program, you've probably seen it has its own entry on the navigator on the left-hand side. And the build program is an important place to visit before you go into your reports, before you use Smart Scheduler if you've got it, before you do any work on your customer quotation, before you look at stage payments or any of those other tools. You want to go into your build program and make sure that's set up sensibly, otherwise the dates that the software are using won't make sense. Okay, so on the left hand side there you'll see we've got the build program, so if you could click on that. The build program is obviously commonly referred to as a Gantt chart, so the two terms are interchangeable when we're talking about them in terms of EstimatorXpress. So as I think I've touched on before, the build program tool in EstimatorXpress can now, it's a recent development, it can now read the labour calculations from your estimate to work out the build phase lengths. So it's an automated, intelligent process if you've selected that option when you created your estimate. So I'm going to talk through how the automated build program works and how you can set it up for your specific job. So when you open up your build program, this wizard, the build program wizard, opens up over the top of your build phase. That hasn't actually been created yet because there's some items that we need to select and input before we can do that. So the first thing you need to do, as the title at the top suggests, is think about your preferred gang sizes. So for each of the different phases, for the different trades, you will need to consider the gang sizes that you typically use for each build phase. Now, of course, the gang size is important because it impacts on the duration of each build phase. So if you're using a bigger gang, your build phase is going to be shorter, and vice versa. So these defaults that you're selecting here will be your default gang sizes used in any new jobs that you create. So we're talking default settings on this first screen. So for example, we could change the bricklaying gang to a bricklayer and mate. So you can see at the moment, wherever we've got a bricklaying gang specified, it's currently using 2 bricklayers and a mate. If you wanted, you could switch those to a bricklayer and mate. And of course, the impact of that would be that that particular build phase, so footings, would take longer. So that's going to impact on your build program. If the gang size you want is not there, in the drop down there, you'll see the list of options. So for the bricklaying gang, what the software is doing is it's referring to the price book to those bricklaying gangs that you've got set up in there with their rates. So your rates should match what you set your software up to have during session 2. If the gang you want isn't in this list here, then you could go back into your price book and add into your library price book and add that gang in. But I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the next couple of screens. So it's just a case of working your way down the list, reviewing labourers or gangs that are selected for each trade within each build phase. So I'll just let you have a look at those for a moment, and we don't need to change anything at this point. Obviously, there's a scroll bar, so there's some more items to look at as you scroll down the screen. Now, you may see some items which ask for a user-defined duration. So these are items, in this case, that you've added as a subcontract quotation. And because you've just put them in as a fixed price, there's no labour data associated. The software hasn't done any estimating for that particular phase. So what it's saying is that you need to give a duration for this particular build phase. So we'll come back to these again in a moment. But the main thing you need to do on this screen is just check that you're happy with the gang sizes that are selected for each trade within each build phase. You'll see there's a tick box there that allows you to switch off this screen in future jobs. So if you're happy with your defaults, you can tick that and this screen won't come back up. I'll leave that set unticked for now. Okay, so if we click next, you go onto a screen which is rather similar, but it's doing something slightly different. So at the top, we can select a build program template. So there's two main options here, a new build template and an extension or renovation template. We've also got a couple of COVID secure options at the moment. How they work is that they ensure you don't have multiple trades on site at one time. So if part of your COVID risk assessment is that your trades don't overlap, then you can select one of those options at the bottom. But if we just select a typical extension or renovation for now. So then the rest of the screen, as I say, is very similar to the previous one. The difference is here is that you can see the cost per build phase for this particular project, this particular job, because what we're doing is we are selecting the gang sizes and setting out the durations for this particular job now. So we're not talking default, we're talking this particular estimate for this particular job. So again, if you scroll down, you can see the different phases. You may have some preliminary phases at the top, and you may have some build phases where you need to set the duration. But if we start with the construction phases to start with, so for example, if we look at foundations, you'll see the trades working within this phase are the ground workers, as you'd expect. So you can see the total figure for ground worker costs within the foundations phase. If you hover your cursor over that, it will give you that breakdown of the labour costs involved with that phase. So we can see the total cost for the foundations is £1,034. And in this pop-up list that we can see, there's a mixture of ground worker's mate, and ground worker and mate, depending on the task. So we've got different tradespeople specified. So I think one thing that people sometimes struggle with a little bit with the build program is that we're allowing you to change your gang sizes for the purposes of the build program for planning the project. This will not have any impact on your estimate. So within your estimate, you're still going to have your two bricklayers and a mate specified for most of your bricklaying tasks, for example. So we're not changing the estimate, and we're not changing the costs within the estimate. What the software is doing here is it's allowing you to change the gang sizes, and what it does is it takes that build phase cost and it divides the build phase cost by the hourly rate for the gang you've got selected, and that works out the duration of the build phase. So say, for example, for our foundations where we're using ground workers, if we change that to just a ground worker, so we're halving the manpower there, you'll see the duration, which is just above the drop-down box. If I put it back again just to show you. So ground worker and a mate, it was saying the foundations would take 4 days, but if we switch to just a ground worker, so he's obviously a slightly more skilled labourer, it will then take 6 days because he hasn't got his mate working with him. So as I say, we're not changing the estimate here, but what we're doing is we're taking the budget for that particular phase, and the software is then dividing it by the hourly rate for the gang you've selected, and that will then give you your duration. So hopefully you're seeing that you can play around with the gang sizes here and see how it impacts on your build phase duration. So if you need to get a job done more quickly, you can see how you can use a larger gang to bring down the build phase duration, and vice versa. So you can go through and you can change the gangs that you anticipate you're going to be using for any of the particular phases for any of those trades. So if we go back to the top, you'll see for site setup here, we've got a preliminary phase. The software doesn't have any labour information for that particular phase, so we can specify the number of days that we think it will take. So you might say site setup will take 7 days. So you can either type into the box, or you can use the up and down arrows to specify the duration of that particular phase. Okay, so I will be taking the odd sip of my drink in the hope that I can avoid a tickly throat today. Okay, so as we scroll down, then the other phase that we need to specify duration for is the plumbing first fix. So we added a subcontract quote for our plumber to supply and fit the radiator and connect it to the existing system. We put it in plumbing first fix because we had to assign it to one or the other. And again, we can define the duration here. So I'm happy to leave that set to 1 day. If you want to add in another build phase for plumbing second fix when he comes back to fit the radiator, we could do that within the build program, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. Okay, there's one other way of specifying the duration here in the screen that I want to show you, and that is using what we call a user-defined rate. So if I have a look at the masonry shell, for the bricklaying costs, we've got 2 bricklayers and a mate specified. If I wanted to change that to say a 3-in-1 gang, as I mentioned before, you could go into the price book and add them into the price book and then select them here with their relevant hourly rate. But the other thing you can do is select a user-defined rate. So our current working days is 4 working days, but say I wanted to put in the rate for a 3-in-1 gang, I can select that user-defined rate option. And if I just quickly work out, so 3 bricklayers would be 75 plus 15, so it'd be £90 an hour for a 3-in-1 gang using my example rates here. So I could select user-defined rate and then just type in 90 quid an hour, and you'll see again the working days has been adjusted to 3 days now because it's recognizing we've got a bigger gang, so the work's going to get done more quickly. So if you want to add a 3-in-1 gang into the price book, then you can do that. That's an option, or you can just use that user-defined rate and put in the total cost for the gang here. So that's the third way you can control the duration. So I'm going to put it back to 2 brickies and a mate for now. Okay, so I'll give you a moment or two just to look at the different phases, have a look at the different costs. You might want to mouse over them, see where the costs are coming from, have a play around with changing the gangs that are specified and the effect that has on the duration of the phases. And then, yeah, I'll give you a minute to do that, and then we'll move on to the final screen of the wizard. I should just mention quickly, actually, this tick box here. So where you've got multiple trades within one build phase, there's a tick box that allows you to say whether the work is going to occur concurrently. So are your ground worker and bricklayer going to work side by side? So if we look at the masonry shell, if I untick that box there, oh, it doesn't have much of an impact there. Oh, it does for the footings. So if we untick that box, then it increases the duration. So if applicable, you can think about whether that tick box needs unticking if the trades are not going to be working concurrently on site. Okay, so if we click next, the final screen then is just where we set the job start date. So when we created the estimate, we set a provisional start date. Once you're planning the work itself, then of course you can come in here and adjust that start date. So say it's going to start a fortnight later, so it's going to start on the 15th of November. We could have a quick preview of the build program just to check we're happy with it. If there's anything you think you want to tweak at this point, you can always go back to the previous screens, but we can also manually edit the build program. So if we click finish, that will open up the build program. So if we just take a moment to have a look around the screen and familiarise ourselves. So on the left hand side, we've got the start date drop down box, so you can review and change the start date again if you need to. We've got on the left hand side a list of all of the build phases, their start dates and their durations. Across the top we can see the dates. Not quite sure why it's not showing Monday and Wednesday. It must be to do with the zoom on my screen. Yeah, if I zoom in there, you can see all the days of the week there. So we've got some zoom buttons at the top. Sometimes when you're working on it, it's better to zoom in to do close work, but then if you want the overview, then of course you might want to zoom out, or the auto fit button is quite handy for fitting the project into your screen. So yeah, we've got dates across the top, and then on the right hand side I've got my the build program settings pane. If it's tucked to one side, you might need to hover your cursor over the edge of that border there till you see that double-headed arrow, and then you can extend it out. Also, it can be pinned to the side, so if you click on that arrow, it will hide it, tab it, and pin it to the side. So where it says build program, you can click on it to open it back up. So you might want it tucked out of the way, or you might be happy for it to be visible when you're editing. So we'll come back to this pane on the right hand side because it allows you to do some useful things, important things. Okay, so we've looked at how you can change the start date in the same way as everywhere else in the software, so I won't go through that again. So if we click on the masonry shell, so you can click where it says masonry shell on the build phase list on the left hand side, you'll see it highlights that build phase across the screen. When a build phase is selected, on the right hand side we can see some information about it. So we can see its start date and its finish date at a glance, its duration. We can look at the colour of it, we can change the colour of it if you've got particular colour coding that you use. We can also see the links for this build phase. We're going to come back to links in a few moments. This remove build phase button is greyed out, so you can't remove it. That's because it is a build phase with estimated data. So because there's items in the estimate that are associated with a masonry shell, you can't delete it from your build program. If you add any build phases of your own, those can be deleted, so you'd be able to click that button. So although this build program is automated to try and give you a head start with your build program, you can of course interact with it. You can override the calculated build phase times as you see fit. We recognise that you've got human understanding of the job, that the computer just doesn't. You'll know things about available workforce, any complications and challenges, any particular tasks that you think that's just going to take a bit longer because it's just a bit of a pain in the arse on this job. So all those things can come into play, and you can tweak the build program if you need to. So say, for example, you wanted to change a build phase start date or duration or end date, you can do all of those things. So first of all, I'll show you how you can move a build phase. So you might say, well, actually, this masonry shell is not going to start till a couple of days later because my bricklaying gang is on another site. So to move that build phase, if you hover your cursor over the build phase, you'll see you get that four-way arrow. And if you click and hold down your left mouse button once you've got that particular cursor on screen, and then you can just drag the build phase to the right, you'll see that blue bar appears showing where the build phase is going to go. And then you can just drop it again once you're happy with its new position in the build program. So because that's straddling a weekend, if I put it back, you'll see the bar is actually longer because it's taken into account that you're not working over the weekend, which is the pale grey column that you can see there. So you just have a play around with doing that for a minute. So hover your cursor over a build phase, and then you can just drag it left and right to wherever it needs to go. So when you drag a build phase, you're obviously changing its start date, but you're not changing its duration. But of course, again, you are changing its end date. You can also change the start date and end date of a build phase to make it longer or shorter. If you hover your cursor over the end of a build phase, so again, I'm using this masonry shell as my example, I'm going to zoom in a little bit just so I can see that build phase more easily. So if I hover my cursor over the end of the masonry shell phase, we get a different cursor appearing. When it's over the end, you'll see it's that arrow pointing left and right. If you click and hold down your left mouse button now and drag your cursor to the right or the left, you'll see you can shorten or extend that build phase. So in that way, we're changing the end date and we've changed the duration of the build phase. You can do that at the start of the build phase, she says. Maybe you can't. I think, yeah, if you want to change the start date, you need to drag the bar. But if you want to change the end date, you can place your cursor over the end and play around with the duration that way. Okay, so I am going to just put the masonry shell back where it started. So it started on a Monday, I think. And I'm going to leave the masonry shell duration set to 4 days. So if you can have a play around and then return it to its original position, so it was starting immediately after your oversight and slabbing finished. Make sure the duration is set to 4 days. You can also move build phases so that they're in a different position within the build program. So in other words, you can move them up or down the chart. To do that, we've got some up and down arrows next to the start date drop down there. I'll show you how to do that in a minute if we add the plumbing second fix phase in. Okay, so we can see here that lots of the build phases have these blue arrows between them, these links. The official name for those links is task dependencies. So they set out which tasks are dependent on others. So usually which build phases have to be finished before another phase can begin. So again, with our masonry shell here, you can see that the oversight and slabbing has to be finished. So this blue arrow is telling us oversight and slabbing has to be finished before masonry shell can begin. And if we look further back down the chain, we'll see oversight and slabbing can't start till footings have been finished, which, as you'd expect, can't begin until the foundations are complete. So you can review the links for each build phase. So if we look at masonry shell, on the right hand side on this build program pane here, we can see that it tells us about this link here. So the predecessor, the phase which comes before, is the oversight and slabbing phase, and the link is from finish to start, so from the finish of oversight and slabbing to the start of masonry shell. There are other options here, so finish to finish, start to finish, and start to start, if there's a different type of relationship between the two phases. Some phases will have multiple task dependencies. So internal fitting out, if I can find it. So internal fitting out here has to start after joinery second fix, electrical second fix, and plastering have been completed. So it's dependent on three of the phases being complete. Another thing that you might want to consider is the lag time. So lots of the task dependencies don't have a lag time. It's just one phase finishes, the next can start immediately. But some things, say for example, your plastering, you might want to add a lag time in there. So I've said, I don't know, your internal fitting out can't start till 5 days after your plastering if you need time for your plastering to go off. And you could do the same for joinery second fix. In fact, if I do that now, you can see we'll add that same lag time to the other build phases. So if there needs to be a lag time for construction purposes, or because you've just got a period when you need to leave a gap, then use that lag to help you with that. So the links, the task dependencies, are intelligent as well, because they mean that if we lengthen or shorten a build phase, then any subsequent linked build phases will be moved along appropriately. So if I go back to the start, so for example, if the foundations take a little bit longer than expected, we need to extend the duration of foundations. Then because the foundations phase is taking longer, footings has been pushed back, and then so has oversight and slabbing and masonry shell and everything. You can see how it's cascaded through the project, setting everything back by a couple of days. So once you've got those links set up, those task dependencies set up properly, then any changes you make are going to cascade through your job as you would expect. So on this right hand side here, as well as seeing the build phase data here and being able to change the links, we've also got the resource breakdown. I just thought actually I haven't shown you how to set up a link. I'll just do that quickly. So if you want to set up your own link between some phases, so say I wanted to set out that the masonry shell can't begin until foundations has started. I'm going to zoom in a little bit again so we can see the end of foundations and the start of masonry shell. So if you hover your cursor over just off the end of a build phase, so just off the end of foundations in this case, you'll see a blue dot appears. If you click on that dot and hold down your left mouse button, you can then drag and draw a link between the end of that phase and the start of another. So I'm going to hover my cursor over the start of masonry shell. Again, you'll see a little blue circle appear. If you release your left mouse button once you've found that circle, so I know that one is a bit nonsensical, but hopefully you can see in theory how it works. You can also do you should be able to do a link from the start of one phase. Oh, they're coming up now. To the start or the end of another. So you can do it from the start or the end. Okay. So basically you just need to hover your cursor over just off the end of the build phase, click and hold down the left mouse button on that blue circle, and then find the corresponding start or end of the build phase that you want to link it to. Right, I'm just going to remove that link that I've added there. So you can click remove any links that don't make sense if you need to. So it's just a case of drawing a connection from the start or end of the build phase to the next build phase that you want to link it to. Once you've done that, of course, you can then set up the lag times and so on. So yeah, the other tab that I wanted to show you is this resource breakdown tab on the right hand side. So what that does is it takes you into a screen which is similar to the cost breakdown screen from the main quote template screen. So it gives you a summary of the costs for the particular build phase that you've got selected. So at the moment I've got masonry shell highlighted, and we can see all of the estimated data associated with that phase. This can be handy if you want to just look at the labour. So where it says type of resource, you could select, unselect all, and tick labour. And then you can see that breakdown of the labour quantities for that particular phase. So I can look down and I can see at a glance, right, so I've got my joiner constructing the dummy frame, so that's going to take half an hour. And so on. You can look at your bricklayer timings, and it might be that those help you to tweak your build phase durations and again use your human judgment as you're setting up your build program. So I just wanted to flag up that that was there if that's useful to you to refer to. Okay, so I said we can add in our own build phases as well if we need to, and the example we were going to do was add in a plumbing second fix phase for when our subcontract plumber comes and fits our new radiator. So if we click the add build phase button, we can see a list of all of the build phases that are available to add into the build program. If we scroll down, we should find plumbing second fix. So it's listing the ones that aren't already in there. If it's already in there, it won't appear. If it's already in the build program, sorry, it won't appear in this list. So tick plumbing second fix and click select. When build phases are added, they are always popped in at the top of the build program. That's because it doesn't have any labour data associated with it, so it needs its duration defining, and it needs to be placed in the correct position on the build program as well. So using those those position arrows at the top of the screen, we can move plumbing second fix down the list, and we can see in the task list on the left hand side. Let's just pop it above electrical second fix. So it's in the right place in the sequence, but then of course it needs putting back later in the project, so we can place our cursor over the bar and drag it into position. So I'm scrolling and then dragging that build phase into position. And then of course we need to change the duration of it because it's far too long at the moment. It's only going to take a day, well, less than a day for this plumber to finish his work. So I'm going to drag that back. So remember to change the duration, put your cursor over the end of the bar and then use the left mouse button to drag the build phase where you want it so it's the correct duration. So of course now we can add a link as well. And this is why I wasn't going to show you how to do it, add the links earlier, because I was going to do it at this point, so doing it twice. So So let's say plumbing second fix can't start until plastering is complete. So find the plastering phase, place your cursor over the dot off the end of plastering, click and hold down your left mouse button, drag that line to the start of our plumbing second fix. So again, remember that means plumbing second fix can't start until plastering has been complete. With all the others, we'd set a lag time, hadn't we? Which is why plumbing second fix is coming straight after plastering. But again, we can add a lag time in there. So we click on plumbing second fix and add in that 5-day lag to line it up with the other second fix items. Just as an example, not that you would necessarily need to do that. Okay, so hopefully you've seen there how you can add another build phase and how you get it in the correct position in the chart using the arrows and then dragging it through the weeks until it's in the right place. There is a tool for adding your own build phases. So if you go to add a build phase and the one you want isn't in there, maybe it's an unusual type of task that needs to be done, within the settings and then EstimatorXpress options, so using the settings tab at the top, then EstimatorXpress options, the second option down, build phases. If you click that, you can type in your own build phase name. So what some people like to do is just have a plumbing phase, for example, not first and second fix. So when they do things like add subcontract quotes for plumbing where it straddles two both phases, they will just pick a generic plumbing phase and then it shows as plumbing in the quote. It doesn't show as first fix or second fix. So if they like to do that, or there might be something else that you'd like to add in there. So you just type it in the top, click add, and then when you go to your add build phase button and click that, your new build phase will be available to add into your build program. So yes, some people like to use that facility to add their own, markers on the build program. So if there's something you want to show, that can be a bit of a hack for getting your own labels. I guess it could be like critical dates and things that you want to insert into the build program. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing how you can edit the build program by changing the durations, start dates, end dates of phases, how you can play around with the links. Once you're happy with the build program, you can of course print it. We've got a couple of new print options. So the standard print button will open up a preview which looks hopefully identical to the build program you've just seen on screen. So by default, it's fitting that to one page. So you can print the entire build program. If you want to print a selected date range, there's an option to print a date range. So you simply specify the dates that you want to include. So say I wanted the build program for December. I could select the dates I want to include, click OK. And then we can see just that limited portion of the build program. The other thing you might want to do, of course, sorry, I should say you can print from here. I'm going to close that down for now. The other thing you can do is export your build program. So if you want to send it to colleagues or send it off to get printed and larger, A1 print for on your site cabin wall or something, then you can save it as a PDF or export it as a PDF or an image file. So if I select PDF, save it to my desktop. And there you've got a PDF version of it as well. So just close that down. So a couple of things to highlight before we leave the build program. The first is that the build program controls the dates that appear in all of the date-based reports. So reports like cash flow, profit forecast, order schedules, and so on. Any reports which use dates, they will take the build phase dates from the build program. So that's why I said you need to make sure your build program is set up sensibly and as accurately as it can be before you go into your data reports. The other thing is that, as I've mentioned along the way, the build program is taking account of the labour times in the estimate, but it's always good practice for you to review the calculated build phase length, use your knowledge, your expertise, your understanding of any complexities of the job to make sure that the build schedule is realistic for your particular project. Okay, so are there any questions on that before we move on to the data reports? Okie dokes. So if anything pops into your head, feel free to ask me at any point. Okay, so we're now going to move on to looking at the data reports. So in the navigator on the left, if you click the arrow next to where it says outputs, we have got a number of different written documents depending on the options you've got available in your software. We've got graphs and we've got data reports. So we're next going to look at the data report. So if you can click on that. The reports we have in the software, they contain huge amounts of useful data about your estimate. And without a doubt, using these reports effectively will help you manage your business better. One of the things we're talking about a lot at the moment at HBXL is that the profit doesn't come in winning the job, does it? It comes in managing it effectively all the way along. Because all those, slight delays, if your materials are late on site, if you've got subbies waiting around 4 hours before they can make a start, that kind of thing, all of those things, they will erode your profits. So if you can be on top of your material ordering, if you can be aware of any potential delays and proactively managing them, then that's really important, isn't it, for protecting your profits? So we're going to go into a few different reports, think about their use, but I would recommend that if you have a little bit of time to spend going through all of the reports, we obviously haven't got time to look at all of them today, to get an understanding of the data that's available within them, and then you can decide which ones you feel will be useful to you. So the first report I'd like us to look at is the second one from the top. So you can see on the navigator, you can see a list of all of the reports on the left-hand side, and on the data report screen here as well. We can open them from either place, but if we go for the second one down, sales price including overheads and profit, I should say. So once this report's open, if you want to move to a different report, you can just click on the navigator. That's the quickest way to do it. Okay, let me just take a quick sip and then I'll talk you through this screen. Okay, so after the session today, I'd like you to feel confident to have a bit of a play around with these reports and edit the layout and the data that's in them. So I'll just give you a talk through the options on the toolbar at the top to start with. So you can copy a report, you can copy any report, give it a new name, save it as your own report. So if you want something that shows something slightly different from what we have given you out of the box, so to speak, you can copy a report, edit it, and make your own. You can delete this report from this particular job. So if you don't want it there in the list, you can delete it. It's not deleting it from your software, just from this particular estimate. Then we've got some presentation buttons. So auto-fit will auto-fit the columns onto the available space on the screen. Now the field list is this pane or panel on the right-hand side. This is essential when you come to editing the reports, adding your own fields in and so on. So it can be hidden or it can be visible. So that's an on-off button basically, but we'll come back to this in a bit. We've got various options here for showing row totals and column totals. So here, for example, we've got those grand totals at the bottom. You can switch that off if you wanted to. Within various reports, you may or may not find those options helpful. We've also got options to hide any items with zero costs or quantities. So sometimes you'll have lines with zero costs and quantities in, but not in this case. Then we've got print and export buttons. If you want to print or export the report to send to somebody. There's also options to save the report to the library. So if you create your own report, you want it available to use in other estimates, you could then save it to the library of reports. And this button on the end is another really useful one. It allows you to restore the report to its original contents, its original layout. So if you are having to play around with a report and you get yourself in a bit of a pickle with it, you can just hit restore report and it will put the original report back in there for you. So hopefully that will give you the reassurance you need to have a play around with, because you can never break it. Okay, so this particular report, sales price including overhead and profit, gives you a simple breakdown of your costs, wastage, overheads and profit for each build phase. Sorry, I'm just looking at the build phase column because it's organised alphabetically, isn't it? And I don't know why it is. I think that's normally organised in a, construction order. So wonder if yours is the same or different. Not to worry for now. So yeah, just cast your eye over that. So we've got different cost columns here. So the first one is costs excluding wastage. Then we've got the column which shows the wastage amounts. And then we've got the total cost including wastage. So that's your total construction costs including wastage. Then we've got the profit amount, the overhead amount, and then we've got the total cost including wastage and including your profit and overhead. Okay, so once you're happy with that report, we can move on to the next one. So the next ones down the list are a number of different trade-specific cost reports. So if I just show you one of those so you know how they work. So if we open the plastering costs, for example. So there's one for each of the trades. It will show any build phases associated with that trade, the labourers who are associated with it, being used for it, and also the tasks they're undertaking and the labour costs. So if we scroll down, for some reason with this report, the show row totals option is unticked. So if you tick that, it should show you your plastering total at the bottom. So again, we've got the costs excluding wastage, the wastage cost, and the total cost including wastage. Okay, so if you wanted to look at a similar one for roof tilers or bricklayers or ground workers and so on, there are multiple ones in there. We've got plastering costs and we've got plasterers costs. I think the difference is plastering costs shows the materials as well, whereas plasterers costs is a labour only report. So if I take show row totals again, yeah, so the plasterers costs is literally just the labour. So the next report I'd like us to look at is costs by resource. So these are all fairly simple ones we're starting with. Cost by resource, so it's about another 6 rows down. Costs by resource shows your costs organised by different resource types. So it's a very simple report. So yeah, you can see the 5 different resource types. So at a glance, you can see how much of the project cost is going on materials, how much is going on labour, plant, and so on. Okay, so those are all some very simple reports. So if we open up cash flow now, which is the next one down, cash flow, as you would probably expect, it shows the outgoings for your job. So as I mentioned before, the chart is based on dates. So it requires you to have a reasonably accurate build program in place prior to opening it. Otherwise, the dates will all be a bit nonsensical. So the cash flow report gives you hopefully a good idea of when you need cash in from your client to cover your outgoings. So your cash flow report can help you with scheduling payments from your client for the project. Okay, so we can see the payment due date on the left-hand side. So this is an approximate due date for having to pay for materials or labour and so on. So as I say, you can use that information to schedule payments in from your client. Okay, one more in the same vein, 2 rows down is the profit forecast report. So profit forecast shows the profit that you're going to earn during the job and also the cumulative profit. Because it's talking about profit, it uses the profit figures set in the job settings. So make sure that you set your profit margins as you want them to be before you use this report. So that's another consideration. Just while that's opening up, actually, I'm not sure if we've got anyone here using the EstimatorXpress Enterprise Edition. But in EstimatorXpress Enterprise, we have an option called Grouped Jobs. So this allows you to link together or group together multiple estimates and use the data from multiple jobs, so you can create a combined build program for multiple jobs on a building site, on a development. But another way that you can use that combined data, which some of our customers do, is to link all of the estimates that you've got booked in for the next 6 months or next 12 months, and you can then look at the profit forecast report for that group of estimates, and that will give you an annual profit forecast for the business. So you can look at what your profit's going to be for all of the work you're doing. But in this case, we're obviously just focusing on this particular estimate. And again, you can see the profit on any of these given dates and then the cumulative profit on the right-hand side. Okay, so if we move on to think about material quantities and material ordering and so on, I'd like us to scroll down a little bit further. Second from the bottom, there's a report called Quotation Inquiry. So the quotation inquiry report is useful if you want to get prices from your merchant. So what I'd like us to do is just have a bit of a play around with it and tailor it to create like a heavy side, it's called, isn't it? Like a heavy side merchants quotation inquiry. So we'll just wait till this opens up and then make a start on that. So by default, the quotation inquiry will show all of the different material types, but we can filter it just to show the material types that we would get from one particular merchant. And we can send it off to that merchant for them to quote us for the whole job. And of course, if we're doing it in bulk for an entire project, then we might get slightly more favourable rates than doing it, you know, bit by bit as we drop in day by day to the merchant. Okay, so have a quick look at the report. You can see we have got the resource types on the left hand side. We've got the description of all the resources, and then we can see some quantity columns. So again, we've got the quantity excluding wastage, the wastage amount, and the total quantity including wastage. So if we want to send this to our heavy side merchant, we could filter the resource types. So each of the column headings, if you hover your cursor over them, you get that little filter icon that hopefully you'll remember from the price book. So for the resource type filter, if we click on that filter icon there, you'll see we get a list of all of the material types. So if we say we want to get a quote from these guys for aggregates, blocks, scroll down a little bit further, concrete products, we'll just leave it there for now as an example. Click elsewhere on screen. We can now see that report has been filtered into a much shorter report. So we've got obviously the print button if you wanted to print it, or we can export that document and send it to your merchant to get a quote. If you wanted to edit it a bit further, you can export it to Excel. There's an Excel presentation style or calculation style. These are new options actually, so I'm not 100% sure on the difference. I'm going to go for the calculation option. So this is going to load this particular report up in Excel. Popped up on my other screen. So it might be that you want to simplify the report. You could delete, I'm just going to delete those columns out so you're only showing the total quantity required. Might want to get rid of that row there. Oops. And so on. Then you can just print it or again export it from Excel and send it to your merchant. So you can use that as a quotation inquiry for your merchant. Okay, so the last report I'd like us to look at is the materials used report. So that's just up from the quotation inquiry on the navigator on the left. So the materials used report lists your required materials organised by bill phase. So we're going to go into this report and then have a go at changing the report so you can see how you can edit them to suit your needs. So before we do that, just a few words about how you might use the materials used report. We hear that many builders visit their merchants maybe 3 or 4 times a week, and every time they do that, by the time they've travelled there, picked up what they needed, you know, it might take you an hour or 2. So each week you might be spending up to like the equivalent of a day It might be different for you guys, but some of our builders definitely are spending as much as a day dealing with their merchants. Of course, there are circumstances that will necessitate you going to the merchant on an ad hoc basis. But if you are planning your material orders effectively, then you can significantly reduce the amount of time that you spend at the merchant and travelling to and from the merchant. And that's time, of course, that can be better used estimating, project management, dare I say it, spending a bit more time with your family and so on, those things that are hard to do when you're a busy builder. So the reason I'm saying all that is because you can set up this materials used report to create a delivery schedule for your merchant. Space allowing, that means you can have all your materials delivered to site so that they're available when you need them. You don't have to chase your merchant, you don't have to spend your time on the phone. You don't have to drive to your merchant to make numerous ad hoc collections of materials. You don't have the same problems with availability of materials because you've ordered them 8 weeks in advance and not the day before you need them. They're more likely to be in stock and so on, or to be reserved for you. Now, my dad was a builder himself, and he was telling me the other day how he used to wind up like the ground workers because this was back in the day. I don't know if it works in quite the same way these days, but he didn't have very many employees. They're mostly subbies, but he used to order all of his materials for a project, space allowing. If you got space on site, he would order all the materials and get them delivered, super early. So he'd have his roof timbers being delivered when the ground workers were, just breaking ground. And he said it used to really wind up the ground workers because they had to unload all the roof timbers off the lorries and so on. But he really believed in being super organised about it. So especially with the times we're going through at the moment and the challenges of material availability, having that material order schedule set up at the outset of a job is definitely a good way to work. So we'll do a bit of editing of this report then so we can set it up better for that purpose. The changes that we're going to make can be done in any report, and as I mentioned before, you can ultimately even make your own reports by altering the ones that are in the list there and creating something that's quite different if you need to. So as we saw before, each of the reports has a number of column headings across the top. You can remove column headings and you can add your own into this area here. So this is called the row area. So you can add any columns or take any columns away from here as you see fit. As I touched on before, on the right hand side we've got the field list, and this has all sorts of different categories or fields that you can drag into the report to give extra data. So there are folders with multiple fields within them, so there's all sorts of different fields associated with the resources, for example. And then if you just scroll down, you'll see a number of other fields here, order by dates, all sorts. So every field that's used within the software you can find within that field list. So let's add the date required column or field into our report. So date required is just one of the fields which is just sitting here in the list. So if you click and hold down your left mouse button, you can drag that field onto the report. And if we take it over to the row area here, you can see if you put it next to the column headings, software shows you where that column will appear if you release your left mouse button. So let's put date required to the left of the bill phase column. Once you can see those blue arrows there, you can let go of the mouse button and that date required column will appear on the left hand side. So this now gives you the dates that each of the build phase is starting on. Now, let's say we're not actually interested in the build phase for our delivery schedule. So we can remove the build phase column. So to do that, we find some clear air on the build phase column. So you don't want to click the filter icon, just in a space. Click and hold down the left mouse button and drag that column heading off the report. I normally do it to the top. Once you see that red button with the cross rather, you can release your left mouse button and that particular field will be removed from the report. Okay, so your now report has got one less column and all the materials are grouped together by the date that they're required. So we can drag other headings from the field list and place them in the report. So maybe we want to group these resources by resource type. So a resource type, is it? It's within the resource folder. So if we click on the resource folder, scroll down until we find resource type. We can click and hold down that left mouse button and drag resource type onto our report. I'm going to put it to the left of resource description. Of course, the position of the fields will affect the way the report is presented. So items are grouped from the columns on the left. So it's going to be organized by date first and then by resource type, if I put that resource type column in the middle, and then we'll see our resource descriptions and so on. So we can now see the resource types that are required, what particular resources are required, and then if we scroll to the right, we can see the quantities and the costs. Now again, you might want to export this to Excel, and once it's in Excel, you can delete some columns out. So you might think, well, for my delivery order schedule, I don't want costs in there. I just want the items that are required and the quantity. So, I mean, you could remove this purchase cost column. The columns on the right hand side, this is called the data area. They work slightly differently. You can't just drag, they haven't got column headings that you can drag off. But if you look on the right hand side in the field list here, you'll see there's an area called data area. And if you want to remove the resource costs, you can drag them from that area back to the top. So I'm going to do it for the bottom 3 lines, which are all to do with costs. And then the report will simply show quantities, which is better for this purpose. So just to give you a bit of an overview of what this does, this bottom section of the field list also enables you to manipulate the fields within the report. So as I said, the column headings at the top left of the report are in the row area, and then the data area is the columns on the right. So you can actually just move the fields in and out of those areas as well. As people become more confident manipulating the reports, it's actually quicker to do that because you've got less dragging, you know, right the way across your screen. So yeah, I won't go into too much more depth of the reports. It's one of those things that you just need to have a play around with. The more you do, you quickly realise actually it's quite straightforward. So once you're happy anyway with the presentation of your report, as I say, you can export it, email it to your merchant, and hopefully getting on top of your delivery schedule will reduce the number of times you have to visit your merchant. Okay, so I'll leave it there for reports. So as I mentioned at the start, if you've got some time to have a browse through the various reports so you can see the sort of data that's available, then please do so. Before we move on to the quote then, I just quickly want to flag up, if we scroll back up the navigator, there's the graph section. I won't go into this because I won't go into it very very far because they are presentation style reports. You can't manipulate them in the way you can the data reports. It's a series of bar charts, graphs, line graphs, my brain's gone to mush, pie charts. They are visual reports that might be helpful to you if you need to make a presentation of your data to a boss, to shareholders, to the bank manager. So if we look at, let's pick an example out. If we look at sales price by type of report, for example, you'll see we've just got a pie chart here. You can hover your cursor over the pie chart and you'll get a pop-up showing you the costs. I think because I've got two screens, that pop-up is appearing in a slightly strange place. So we can see how much you're spending on, how much the job is costing to the client in terms of materials, labour, plant and so on. Using the graph type, you can change to a different style. 3D ones are quite nice if you are printing them off. Okay, so home straight of the training course, give yourself a pat on the back. I've covered loads of ground. Okay, so before you create your customer quote, check you've completed the client and site address details. So I'll just show you where that is. I'm just going to minimize the outputs section of the navigator and then we can see everything else more easily. So within job settings, we can see client contact details. So if you haven't already, you can go to client contact details, make sure that their details are filled out as they need to be. Of course, also make sure you're happy with your overhead, profit and inflation settings. If that's all in order, then if we go back to outputs, under written documents, we want to click quote for main estimate. Okay then, after a moment then your preview of the quote will appear. So just a quick note on navigating your way around the quote. On the left hand side, you will be able to see the different sections of the quote, so the header, the footer, the cover page, the cover letter, summary, and then the breakdown, acceptance and terms and conditions. So the preview you're looking at the moment is a preview of the complete document from start to finish. If you want to edit one of the individual sections, you can click on to that particular section. So if I want to set up my cover page, I can click cover page, and now I'm purely looking at the cover page, and the settings on the right hand side panel are all to do with the cover page. Okay, so you can click on the section you want to edit, and then the settings on the right hand side will relate to that particular setting. We've also got a number of different options along the top. A couple that I'd like to pick out at this point. Obviously, we've got our navigation buttons, so you can zoom in and out, and you can click through the pages when you're looking at the full preview. We've got this button here, Save to the Library. This is a really useful one to use once you have set up the quote with the options that you want to use in the future. You can save these quote settings to the library. Then with any estimates that you create in the future, those quote settings will automatically be applied to any subsequent quotes. So spend a bit of time with your first one, getting it presented like you want it to be, then click Save to the library, and those settings will be your default settings in the future. So you shouldn't need to spend as much time next time round. Not that it will take long, but it will just remember the way you like to present your quote. The import from the library button works in tandem to that one. So if you've got an older estimate that you think, oh right, I want to import my quote settings that I've worked on, you can open up that estimate, click import from the library, and it will import those latest settings that you've saved. Okay, so most of the tools that you want to tailor your quote are on this right hand side in the settings pane. So if I go back to quote for main estimate, which you'll remember is the preview of the whole document, the main settings tab is usually visible. That's what you'll see when you first come onto this screen. The first thing you might want to consider is the type of quote that you are creating. We have 3 options in the software. The build phase quote is a traditional style customer quote. Most of our builders use this one. It breaks down the quote into different build phases. So this is probably the quote you will want to use for the majority of your work. There are a couple of different options though, which may be useful in certain situations. The estimating calculator option will break the quote down by estimating calculator. So for example, it won't present your quote in terms of foundations, footings and masonry shell. It will break it down into brick and block cavity wall and that kind of level of detail. That can be useful when you're doing specific types of work. So if you're doing, say, just plastering for a renovation job, it allows you to label up your estimating calculators. It's a bit of an old school way of doing it, but you could in theory go into the estimating calculators in the main estimate and label up your rooms, you know, bedroom 1, bedroom 2, lounge, kitchen and so on, and then you could itemize the costs for each particular room. So that's the one application. But if you think you might want to go down that route, I would suggest you speak to tech support and they can talk through the logic with you, whether that's the best way to do it. The other thing you can do is use a location-based quote. So when you're working in any of the dimensions wizard, there's a drop down which allows you to set the location of that particular bit of work. So if you're doing renovation work, so if you were doing work on a house where you were converting the garage into an office, you were decorating some of the rooms, and you were doing some landscaping work, and you wanted to section off those bits of the quote, so you wanted to have all of the garage renovation grouped together, all the landscaping grouped together, all of the house decoration grouped together, then when you're estimating each of the different elements, you can assign them to the correct location and then use the location quote type. So again, it's particular scenarios where you might want to do that, but 9 times out of 10 or 99 out of 100, you might just be best off using the build phase option. You can also decide which types of data you want to include in the quote. So as standard, all the different resource types will be included, but if you want to do a labour only quote, you could just select labour, and then no materials and other resource types would be included. But most of the time you're going to want them all included, I'm sure. Then we've got a number of tick boxes to control which different sections of the quote we want to include. So I haven't got assumptions and omissions. Sorry, I've got a strepsil in my mouth as I'm trying to talk. Or provisional sums. So I've unticked those boxes. It might be that you don't want to include terms and conditions because you've got a separate document that you want to use for that. You can untick any sections that you don't want to include just there. And then a couple of really important things to think about in terms of your main quote settings. Do you want to include inflation? I've got that box ticked as default in my quote now because I think it's really important to factor that in. So I've got it ticked. Of course, that's your choice. And then VAT, if you click on the VAT box and have a quick look at the options there. So I believe by default this is set to a 20% VAT rate. But this figure can be changed either if VAT rates change or if you're doing work for different classifications of building work. So I believe the VAT rates might be different for certain types of work like new build or listed buildings and so on. So if it was a 5% VAT, you could change that to 5% here. You can also put in a fixed amount if that's the way you need to work. The third option is input only. So if you're not VAT registered, you can use the input only option. What the input only option does is it adds VAT onto the cost of resources that you're paying for, such as materials and any VAT registered subcontract companies. But with the input only option selected, EstimatorXpress will not apply VAT to the quote as a whole. And that's because as a non-VAT registered company, the VAT becomes an actual cost to your business and it's not reclaimable, or so I'm told. So just think about your VAT situation and select the relevant option. Okay, and then finally, in terms of the main quote settings, you can play around with the font style and size and so on. If you've got standard fonts that you use for your company, then of course you can select them just here. Okay, so those are like the overall global settings for the quote. As I said, we can drill down into each section of the quote and have a look at the settings within each setting as well. One thing I haven't mentioned yet, if you make any changes to your quote, you need to be sure to click the Apply Changes button at the bottom because they won't be applied until you click that. Okay, so the header footer section allows us to apply text or images to the header and footer of the entire document. So you can select a category, like a keyword from the from within the estimate. So at the moment, I've got the site address on the right-hand side, the date the quote was created on the left. You can also include a banner, so you can insert a picture, an image file using those options there. And again, for the footer at the bottom, you can select a picture or a particular data piece of information that you like to display. So I've got the page numbering at the bottom. So that will display throughout your entire quote. So I'm now going to click on cover page. And again, as I move to a different section of the quote, the settings on the right hand side will change. So the information on the cover page is taken from this box here, and all of the information in these I don't know what they're called, these unusual shaped brackets, those are keywords. Again, they are fields or keywords that are taken from the software. So the reference description is the job description. that I selected when I created the estimate, the client name and site address, they come from the client and site address details that we typed in. So that's why you need to make sure that they're input correctly. The other thing that you will probably want to insert on your cover page is your company logo. So to do that, at the bottom, if you tick include logo, click browse your computer for the image file that you want to insert. Then you can play around with the size. So I'm just going to, I've already inserted it, but I'm going to increase the size of my logo. Don't forget to click apply changes once you made a change. And if I scroll down, my logo is a bit bigger. You can decide whether you want it at the bottom or the top. And you can decide if you want it left, center or right. And then these padding options here is basically how many mil it is from, well, let's put it at the top. So the vertical padding is telling me it's 30 mil from the top. If you're putting it to one side, then again you could set the horizontal padding as well. So that's going to control the location of it there. I'm going to leave it set to center. Okay, it's just a case of playing around with those options until it's appearing as you'd like it to. It's a really good idea to make sure your company logo is on the front so that it stands out, that your quote is very obviously yours, get it to stand out from the crowd. Okay, so if you're happy with those details, I should say this text box here, you can type into it, you can overwrite anything that's in here, you can add your own text in there. If you're not happy with the job details, how they're displaying, you can click edit details and you can change the job name. So for example, I've called my job name training estimate, and if I had my job name in there, is it just name? Let's have a look. No, that's my name. Okay, let's try again. So if I wanted to change the description to lean to extension, there we go. That reference description is the job description. Because I've changed the job description in there, it's been updated on my cover page. So sometimes you might just pick something quickly when you're creating it and you think, actually, no, I want it to be described differently. So you can go back to the job and edit the details. Or you can just do some free text in here. You can delete out any of the keywords you don't want, type in what you do want. The great thing about the keywords and getting them set up the way you want is if you're using those keywords here, you save these options to the library, then those keywords will be used and pulled out from your estimate, whichever estimate you're using, so they should always make sense. That's the good thing about using those keywords. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the letter on the left-hand side. So the software comes with some sample template cover letters. So because it's an extension job, the extension letter has been selected by default, and you can have a read through that. Again, lots of the keywords have been pulled into the cover letter, so you want to leave those as they are, but you might want to tweak the wording if you do that. So if I just wanted to say thank you very much for your valued inquiry, I can click save. I can overwrite that extension template. Yes, please, I want to save that. The other thing you can do, if you've got your own letters set up already that you want to use, you can copy and paste the contents of your letters into here. So if you've got a Word document, highlight the wording in the Word document, Press Ctrl and C to copy it out of Word. And then in here, you could just highlight the body copy. The body, sorry, I sound like a marketeer. The main content of the letter. And then press Ctrl and V on your keyboard to paste in your wording. Once you've done that, you can either you can overwrite the extension template that's there, or you can give it a new paragraph name, which is something I've done before. So I've got my own company's extension paragraph saved there. So if you want to do that, give it a new paragraph name and then click OK. Then your new paragraph is going to be available in any estimates that you work on in the future, any quotes that you put together, I should say, in the future. We've also got variations for a renovation and a new build and so on. So you can just select the relevant one for your particular project. There's also an option to include a letterhead. That's best done by saving your letterhead as a single page size image. Tech support tell me if you want to do that, give them a call and they will talk you through that, because it's a bit fiddly in terms of getting your image the right size. Okay, so once you're happy with your letter, I should just touch on actually you can insert keywords into your letter as well. There are pages for assumptions and omissions and provisional sums. Those can be added from within the main quote template screen. So if you want to add in some things that some assumptions you made about the job, so that the foundations will be a certain depth, or if you're doing some renovation work or a loft conversion and you're assuming that the roof timbers are suitable for putting the skylights in, but that needs to be checked. You can be very explicit about any assumptions you made in your quote, also any omissions. So if the client's told you that they are providing the window, you can be very clear and say you have not quoted for the cost of the window itself and things like that. So you can do that from within the main quote template screen. Also, if you need to add any provisional sums, so if you're getting a bespoke staircase or something, you want to put it in as a provisional sum, you can do that. And then, of course, you would want to have those relevant sections appearing in your quote. Then we've got the summary. This is a summary of costs for the quotation. So you just got a few tick box options here, so you can decide whether you want to show the build phase totals or literally just the bottom 3 lines. There's also an option to show this summary after the quote breakdown. So normally as standard, we present it before the breakdown, but you can tick that box to show it at the bottom. You can show a material summary and a labour summary on there if you want to. And then there's an option to break the page after each full summary section. So just a few kind of options in terms of where it's presented. And then we've got the breakdown. So this is obviously the bulk of the quote. So we can see how this is presenting at the moment. So if you click on the build phases tab, this controls how all of the build phases appear. So there's a number of settings you might want to think about in here. So there's an introductory paragraph that appears at the top. You can edit that if you want to. There's an option to ensure each build phase starts on a new page. So at the moment, they're kind of appearing continuously, but if you want one build phase starting, you don't want more than one build phase on a page, basically, you can tick that box. Requires a bit more paper, so untick that for now. Then there's some settings you might want to think about. So within each build phase heading, do you want to show the build phase image? So you'll see we've got little icons for each build phase. We'd always recommend that you leave those on for a domestic client. Firstly, it helps them with their understanding of what each of the different build phases is. The other reason then that it's a good idea to show those images is based on a bit of psychology. Bear with me a second. It's the same reason why when you walk into a car sales showroom, they will, as quickly as possible, get you sitting in the car. They want to create that emotional connection with the car, and in our case, we want to create that psychological connection with the impending building work. So it might sound a bit highbrow, it might sound a bit silly, but it is part of the sales process. So if your client is a business client, then of course they'd probably like to have a better understanding of the build phases. They're not going to be looking at images, so you might want to switch them off. But of course, it's entirely up to you. So the description is the build phase description. If you want to edit any of the individual descriptions, if you go to the next tab along, so because I'm looking at the foundations, I can look at the foundations build phase. I can then see that paragraph, that particular section of the quote, and I can make any changes I want to in there. We've also got the option to include an image on a phase by phase basis. If you've got another image that you want to import, then you can browse and select a different image as well. Okay, so back to the build phase settings. Here we've got tick boxes for each of the build phases. So if there's any that you want to hide for any particular reason, you can do that. The costs will still be included in the quote. It's just that they won't be set out separately. So any unticked boxes will be grouped together in the additional charges section. So there might be something that's very small that you think, well, that doesn't need itemizing separately. I'd rather that just goes in additional charges. I can explain it verbally what it is. So you can untick the boxes. I'm going to tick those for now. There's a few more options here. We're getting into really fine detail stuff here, but the last thing I'd really like to draw your attention to is the resources and the show quantity tick box. So if I tick show quantity and apply changes, this simply, if I go down to a more interesting phase, this adds material quantities to your estimate. And we know lots of builders are quite wary about doing this because A, they feel like they'll be held to it by the client, but we really feel it will strengthen the quality of your quote. It allows you to explain your costs to the client. The client can see you're being specific about this. You haven't just come to a figure on the back of a fag packet, that there's some underpinning data for your estimate. The other reason I think builders are sometimes fearful of it is they feel like the client could then go and show it to another builder who could then just quickly throw a quote together based on those quantities. If that's your concern, then you can always produce the quote twice, one with the quantities showing and one with them not. When you're talking through the quote with them, you could show them the version with the quantities and then leave behind one without the quantities, so there isn't that potential risk. But again, at the moment, especially with escalating material price rises, we feel that the more data you can show, the more you can justify your costs. And so if you're going to a client and you're quoting 20 grand more than the next builder to do that job, but they can see the basis for your estimate, they can see how you've got to that figure, and you're presenting yourself in a professional way, then I think there's a lot of clients out there who are going to go with the builder they think is more professional, that they can trust, who's being realistic about the costs. And it comes back to what we were saying about inflation as well. if you're factoring inflation into your quote, it's going to make it more expensive. Fact. But if you're very open with your customer about that, and you say, yes, this quote might be more expensive than Joe Blogs Builders down the road, but that's because I'm quoting you based on what prices are likely to be in 6 months' time, and this is realistic of what you're going to have to pay. That other builder is going to be coming back to you asking for extra money because he's underquoted, or worse still, he might start cutting corners to make back up the ground because he's not making any money on the project. You know, if you can be open with your clients about how you've come to your, that bottom line, then I think that stands you in good stead. So yeah, quantities you might want to show. It's an option there. You can tick to show them, or you can remove the quantities. That's over to you. So there might be some other options you want to have a look at there to do with showing subtotals for the different resource types and so on. There is a really detailed video, which I'll show you in a moment, which goes through every single one, I think, or pretty much every single one of the quote settings that you might want to refer back to when you come to finish tailoring your quotes. I'll show you that in a moment. So the last two sections are the acceptance forms. So we've got a standard acceptance form. You can edit the text in the boxes on the right. You can add in any keywords if you need to, as before. 2 copies of that will be printed with your quote, one for the customer to keep, one for you. And then finally, we've got what we call T's and C's. T's and C's are actually just a serving suggestion. So this is what you might want to put at the end of your quote. However, you have full control over what goes in here. You can change the title. You can enter the main text there. So whatever, if there's another type of document you want to add to the end, you can insert it there. If you've got your own company's terms and conditions, you can copy and paste them in. So it's reminding you can use Control and V to copy into that text box. If you don't want to have any terms and conditions, you don't need to use this section. You can just go back to the main settings and untick where it says show terms, and then you won't get that that page appearing in your quote at all. Okay, so those are all the different sections of the quote. Once you're happy with it, you've got the same options available to you as in most aspects of the software. You can export it if you want to email it to the client, save it to Word if you want to do a bit of further editing in Word, or save as a PDF. And of course, there is a print option as well if you want to print a hard copy. And then it's over to you getting it into the customer's hands. So just a reminder, once you're happy with your quote settings, you can click Save to the library to save those settings for future use. And just to flag up that help video. So don't forget, wherever you are in the software, there's a help tab. We can go to help videos. And within the EstimatorXpress videos, the first category there's a video called Opening and Editing the Customer Quote. So it's a couple of years old, but the settings haven't changed very much at all. So if you want a reminder of any of the things we've been over, that goes into a bit more depth actually than we've even managed during the training. So I would refer you to that. Okay, so that is module 4 done. Excellent work, guys. Thank you for bearing with me and your patience. So yeah, that's everything I wanted to cover. Just reading through my notes here. So if there's anything you want to ask, it's your last opportunity to do so now. I have got a few quiz questions I'll go through with you in a moment. Before I do that, I'll just wrap up everything for the course module so that if anyone needs to get off, they can. So I will ask Joe to send over the recording from today's session. Also, I'm just doing a quick edit of all of the videos, and I'm uploading them to YouTube in their own playlist. So hopefully tomorrow, or if not tomorrow, start of next week, I will get that full list of all of the recordings from our sessions together in one place on YouTube, and I will ask Joe to send that over to you as well, so that you've got those available to you all in one place. I will also ask Joe to send out your certificates for those of you who've attended the whole course. So you'll have a certificate of having completed the EstimatorXpress Software Skills course. Joe will also send to you a link to an online survey. I'm just going to send it to you now as well, if that's okay with you guys. So it's just a quick 5-question survey. I'm going to send it to you. Try and think of the best way to do it. Yeah, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to save it on a Word document, and then I can attach it as a handout. So in GoToWebinar, there is a handouts section. Bear with me just 2 seconds. I will. So I've dropped a file in there called Software Skills Survey Links. In there, in the Word document, there should be a link which will open up in a web browser. So it's just it's a survey, monkey survey. It's 5 questions about the training course, about whether we've covered everything you needed to cover, whether you're happy with the training. If you've got, it shouldn't take you more than 2 minutes. If you could fill that out for me, I'd be most grateful. It lets the powers that be know how we're doing in software skills, and it helps inform future courses and materials that we're providing for you and so on, so that we can make sure that we're best meeting your needs. So I'd be really grateful if you wouldn't mind filling that out. So yeah, I think Joe will send it to you as well in an email. So certificates and links on their way, links to all the recordings. So let's just do our quick quiz questions then. I think we've got 4 of them to do. And then I will bid you adieu. Okay, so starting with the build program. How can I change a build phase duration in the build program? So you can select one of these options. Can you change the labor gang size in the wizard? Drag the end of the build phase bar on the bar chart? Type in a user-defined duration into the wizard, or any of the above? How do you change a build phase duration in the build program? So going back to things we did about an hour ago now, aren't we? It's old news. Okay, thank you to everyone who has responded. I think really this should have been one of those questions where you could click multiple things, because the correct answer is you can do any of those things to alter the build phase duration. So if you change your labor gang size in the wizard, so if you select a bigger gang size, it's going to make your build phase duration shorter, and vice versa. So all of the top 3 options are things you can do which will have an impact on a build phase duration. So of course you can manually drag the end of the build phase, but also you can type in your own user-defined duration for preliminary and subcontract elements of your project as well. Okay, on to question 2. So now whizzing on to reports. So as you know, you can manipulate the data in a report. So the question is, how do I remove a column from a report? Do I click the delete button on the ribbon? Do I drag the column heading off the report to the top of the screen, or do I click restore report? How do I remove a column from a report? Okay, thank you for answering. So to remove a column of data, so a data field from a report, you can drag it off the report to the top of the screen. The delete button will actually delete the report that you're in, but if you click that, I'm sure it will say, are you sure you want to delete it? So it's not a big problem. But yeah, if you want to delete a column, you can drag it off the report, or you can drag it back onto the field list, so you're returning it to its home. But either way, drag the column off if you don't want it. Okay, question 3. So we're now onto the quote. So how do I edit the text in the quote letter, so the covering letter? You can select one of these, but listen to all the options first. Can I copy and paste text from another letter, for example, into the text box using Control C and Control V? Can I type text into the box? Can I add keywords from the software using the drop-down box? Or can I do all of the above? So how can I edit the quote letter? So this was another question where all of the above answers were correct. So there's different ways of editing the text in the quote letter. If you've got your own covering letter for quotes set up in a Word document or another document, you can copy the text and use Control and V to paste it into the text box to save yourself a heap of time. If you just want to make some minor adjustments to the text, then you can just type into the text box and delete and type in the usual way. If you want to add some of those keywords for fields that are taken from within the software, so things like the job details, your company details, the client's details, and so on, they can be inserted as keywords into the text. And it's similar in all the different sections of the quote. Where there are text elements, you can use those 3 approaches to add text or edit the text. Okay, and the last question is about inflation. So I don't think I actually said this in so many words today, but hopefully from conversations we've had during the course of the training, you might have a good understanding of this. So how is inflation applied to the quote? Is it always applied at a fixed rate of 5%? Is inflation never applied? Or can it be applied at the rate set in the job settings? Okay, so you smashed it on the last question, so 100% correct. So inflation can be applied depending on whether you tick that box on the main settings. In fact, it's right in front of us, isn't it? If I hide that for a second, you can decide whether inflation is applied and tick that inflation tick box on the main settings. And inflation is applied at the rate which is set out in the job settings. So if you've set your inflation to 7% or whatever percentage you've set it to, it will be applied to the quotation if you've ticked that box. And of course, there's that delay. So if you're delaying your inflation by 12 weeks, inflation won't kick in until 12 weeks or nearly 3 months' time. So yeah, you're in full control of the rate of the inflation and when it's applied. And if indeed you want it applied to your quote at all, and that is that tick box there that controls it. Okay, so that's all my questions done. So thank you for joining in with that. It's good to have the high level of engagement that we've had during the course this time around. So thank you ever so much for your time. You've been a really dedicated bunch. It's been brilliant to have you for the duration of the course. So thank you for that. I hope you're feeling the benefit in terms of your understanding and use of the software. Going forward, keep in touch with us. Get on the phone to tech support if there's anything you want help with, even if it's just a simple, where do I estimate this? Or how do I add this to my quote? Or it might seem like something silly. It might be a 30-second response. You can always email them. They will respond to emails as quickly as they will pick up the phone. So you normally get a very quick response. So yeah, please do keep in touch with us. Call on us when you need us for some backup. And good luck. Good luck with your future estimating, and we wish you all the best. So yeah, take care, guys. thank you for your attendance, and hopefully I'll speak to you again in the future. All right, cheers then. Bye bye.